Um, so now it's recording. So I'm going to actually say a few things that I've already just said. But thank you so much, everyone, for joining us tonight for our virtual studio visit with Amy Cousins. We are so happy to introduce this new virtual studio visit where we will be spotlighting different artists. And I want to give a special thank you to the Philadelphia Cultural Fund and the Penn Treaty Special Services District for their support for programs like this. And I also want to give a very special thank you to Joanna Booth. Joanna is our Second State Press Programming Coordinator. And Joanna has really handled all of the logistics of making this event possible tonight. As mentioned just a moment ago, this will be shared on YouTube. I'm actually going to share the link to YouTube and put a little shameless plug in here. Second State Press needs you to subscribe to our page. We need 100 people to subscribe to our page in order for us to change and customize our URL. So I think right now we're at 56, so spread the word and share that. I also just want to let everyone know that our member print exchange is coming up. And so artists are invited to create an edition of 22 8x10 prints that they will receive some prints back from the exchange. And it's also used in a silent auction. This year, the silent auction is going to be a little bit different. We are going to host it on December 9th. In addition to having, we're going to invite members to also kind of participate in a pop-up sale. So there'll be more information coming out about that as well. Tonight, this event will be moderated by Emma Flick, who is our administrative coordinator at Second State Press. And I'm going to turn it over to you and Amy to get the conversation going.
Awesome. Thank you, Jen. And thanks everyone for being here. And thank you especially to Amy. I'll give you a brief bio on Amy. Amy Cousins is an artist and educator from Houston, Texas, living in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. She has a BFA from the Maryland Institute College of Art and an MFA from Tyler School of Art and Architecture. Her work has been exhibited nationally at venues including Moore College of Art in Philadelphia, Co-Prosperity Chicago, and the Lawrence Art Center in Kansas. Cousins was an artist in residence at Illinois State University in 2018 and at ACRE Residency in 2019. She is the 2020 recipient of InLiquid's Wind Fellowship. Cousins makes sculptures and installations that mine archives and material culture and stem from a desire to create queer space and time. So with further ado, I'll turn it over to you, Amy.
Thank you so much. Really excited to be here. I have a lot of love for Second State, where I did a fob holder thing in 2013, my first, or one of the first things I did in Philly after moving here, my first year in Philly. PowerPoint asked me today if I wanted to use the captions, and I was like, sure. So hopefully they work out okay and can be helpful. So I'm hoping this can be, more studio visit style, a little bit informal. I'm just going to talk for about 20 minutes, and then there will be lots of time to chat. Not sure if I've ever had this many people in my studio, certainly not in the past couple of years. But I'm just going to talk about work I've made in the last 2 years, which was a strange thing to reflect on. As many of you, I'm still processing the last 2 years, not sure when I'll ever finish. But it was, interesting to kind of sit with that, to put this together. And let me know if you can't hear me or anything like that. So I work a lot with archives, specifically queer archives, spent a lot of time digging around in the John Wilcox Jr. archives at the William Way LGBT Center. And in kind of late 2019, I was kind of becoming obsessed with this publication I found called Country Women, which was coming out in the 1970s and circulating among like lesbian separatists and women homesteaders who all over the country were trying to like live off the land and figure things out, and also like having weird open relationships and trying to navigate all these different things. And so truly like this journal covered everything from like vaginal health to like tractor repair. And so it was just wild for me to see like, you know, for instance, these 2 pages in the same journal. And so I was thinking a lot about that and having my own kind of city queer yearning for plants and land. And I also started looking more into like queer ecology, and thinking about how these things came together, and learning a lot about mushrooms and their expansive sexualities. And so these are paper mache mushrooms that I made, and the top layer is paper mache with risograph prints from scans and snapshots from the Country Women journal. So I was really inspired by queer ecology and wanting to like envision a future with much more expansive ideas about gender and sexuality, but still kind of paying homage to this legacy and history of kind of messy lesbian feelings, but also recognizing the shortcomings in these like kind of more binary ways of thinking and obliviousness to like settler colonial relationships to land. But thinking about land as an archive and about these like fruiting mushroom bodies as like beautiful things that can come out of it. And this is like some rug tufting on the bottom as this like soft mossy layer. This is a installation shot, and I'll talk a little bit about some of the other works in the show. So the kind of guiding text here is boundless genders, endless processing. So envisioning this world of like these mushrooms have 36,000 genders, you know, it's a lot to be talking about, a lot to be processing, especially if they're all, you know, bumping spores with each other and whatnot. So these are made with screen printed paper, mounted and with these grommets inserted into them. And the image is from Schizophyllum commune, which is the mushroom that has at least 36,000 known unique sexes. And I basically compulsively make repeat patterns. So this is a positive that I made drawing these mushrooms before I even like knew what I was going to do with this pattern. And, you know, looking back at this, there's really no reason that there needs to be like a repeat pattern here. Like I could have done this probably a much easier way, but that wouldn't be me. And since a studio visit, I want to show lots of process shots, and shout out to Vivian if she's still watching, my lovely friend and roommate who's helping me print this in this shot. So this is printed on these big yardage tables onto paper, and then yeah, mounted and cut up and all of that afterward. Shot of the full yardage. And I was thinking about all these things about queer ecology, and then at the same time, thinking about the neighborhood in Houston where I grew up, and kept kind of getting distracted from one thing to think about the other. And I just wanted to show this slide because I love this mural and everyone should see it, but also I think it's kind of miraculous that as like a kid born in 1990, I grew up driving by this. And sometimes, I'm jealous of the Gen Z kids. I'm like, wow, you guys grew up with like Steven Universe and like body positivity, but at least I had this mural. And this was the lesbian bar in Houston that I would always see and kind of like dream about one day going to. And it closed when I was 20, so I never went. So it kind of has become like a utopian mythical space in my mind. And I realized that you can time travel on Google Maps. So that's where this image comes from, a different way of archival research, but yeah, fun nonetheless. So I was thinking a lot about this place and about this signage that I would see and kind of what it stood for as like a beacon for me. This was the sign they put up when it was closing. And this was the sign I didn't remember, but I was like, wow, it's a great gay joke. And somebody I had a studio visit with when I was kind of thinking about these things, I was like, yeah, I'm trying to build this show around these like gay mushrooms and all this stuff. But I keep thinking about this dyke bar. And she was like, well, maybe those things are actually more interesting together. And I really liked that idea and started thinking how they could live amongst one another and thinking about these mushrooms like rising from the ashes of this like defunct lesbian bar. And then I also thought of these as like stepping stones and as floor pieces, fitting that they are rug tufted. Although this one is done with machine free motion embroidery. Another shot of the show, and the eat here becomes this strange frame portal thing. And the text is eat here, meet her, eat me, beat it. And I was thinking about kind of cycles and wayfinding and what I like envisioned my future to be, but versus what it turned out to be, and the way that, the neighborhood became fancy coffee neighborhood instead. And this is made with fur hand sewn together and sparkle vinyl. Another shot showing more of the ground. So this show was up in February 2020, so right before lockdown. And the pandemic hit, I really just started spending a ton of time in my garden. Although this picture is actually from this year. But it just felt so good to have my hands in dirt. And it was a place where, we could safely gather with friends. And it was really the only thing that I could focus on. I wasn't like feeling motivated in the studio, but, I think it was really regenerative to like watch things grow and to have my hands in the soil and still like kind of processing thoughts and thinking about histories in the land and the way that the soil and the plants carry these histories. So one of the first creative things I did coming out of like COVID, depression, paralysis, was just make a drawing of my garden. And I don't have a super strong drawing practice, so that really took a lot of like focus and thinking to make this drawing. And, spending a lot of time in my garden and a lot of time at home and just wanting to kind of reflect that somehow in artwork. And then at the same time, seeing the world burn around me and wanting to do the opposite and kind of get out into the world, be out in the streets. And this is a poster collaboration with my friend Josh Grapera from 2020 that we created and sold as a fundraiser for the Philly Bail Fund. so doing this was a way to, connect with my friend and also with other folks, and to try to get some beautiful posters into the streets. And my friend Heather Raquel Phillips was amazingly adaptive and also trying to find ways to show art and have art community during the pandemic. And so she is displaying these outside her house. So these are works by several different artists. And mine is this one, Our Pronouns Are Coracles, Floating Belly Up, which is a line from my friend Danielle Redden's poem. And I think with all of like the heaviness of the world and thinking about the way minoritized people are, made to feel like burdens or associated with these like heavy issues all the time. And, like what a drag to have to like remember people's pronouns. And when for me, like queerness is such a liberatory lens to move through the world with. And so there's like this weightlessness that I wanted to capture, and this spirit of, just like play and thinking of that as defiance and protest as well. And I wanted to also try out just like drawing my interior space, and I took a Zoom workshop of mokuhanga, which I'd been wanting to try for a long time. It's a traditional Japanese woodcut process. And since I figured there'd be some print nerds here, there's one of my plates. So this was my first mokuhanga print, a drawing of our living room. And, this work that I've done around like my garden and my house, it's like not yet something that I feel like I've incorporated into like my capital A art practice. But I think with time, and I'm like starting to integrate them a bit more, but I really let myself just kind of play and not have to have, some giant grand thing behind some of this work, just reflecting my day-to-day experience, being in lockdown. It was really wild after spending, a year at home, unable to go anywhere, to suddenly be displaced from my home in May of 2021, when there was a big fire next door to us. So this is a little zine I made recently, like reflecting on the summer after the fire and bouncing around from different Airbnbs and still like being able to care for my garden, but like having to commute to it. And this is for the Quarantine Public Library. If you don't know them, they're really awesome. And you can go onto their website and print and fold like 100 something, maybe more zines. And then in summer 2021, this year, I got to design a class at Tyler around the garden in the courtyard, which was a garden I started as staff at Tyler as a natural dye garden. And the garden had like fallen into disrepair during the pandemic and after I had left the position. And so this was an opportunity to work with students and revamp the garden, give it new life, and think about how, as artists, we can incorporate that into our practice and be inspired by the plants. So I learned so much teaching this class, and I was so inspired by the students and the plants and the work that we did. And, I really love being able to teach classes that relate directly to my studio practice. So we worked in the garden. We expanded the scope of the natural dye garden to also include more like native plants, and just be kind of more general use for artists. And so we made drawings of the plants. We made textiles, we did eco printing and natural dyeing. We read Braiding Sweetgrass and things about queer ecology. And here's some before and after of the garden, and it's looking so full and wild right now. I wish I had a more recent picture too. And this is a still from one of my students' presentations. They each did like kind of a deep dive on one of the plants in the garden. So it's her pre-research relationship to cosmos, which is Animal Crossing, and post-research, really getting into like the social history of it, and like also this tactile learning, spending time with the plants, hands-on. And yeah, it was super eye-opening to me. I learned so much about all these plants and how they truly all carry these like global histories with them. And I've been teaching a lot of repeat pattern classes and just let myself, go nuts with my demos, choosing plants from my garden to make repeat patterns with. So this is a Carolina Jessamine growing on my chain link fence, made into a painting and then a digital repeat. These are black petunias as a one color screen print. And Passiflora incarnata, or passion flowers, as a 2-color screen print. And yeah, I haven't really done anything with these. To be determined what life they will live. But I have started thinking about bringing my own personal relationship with gardening and plants into my studio practice more. And so I started with this humble garden border, which I have in my garden, kind of came with the house. Then I kind of associate with, I don't know, like the small city garden. And, mine's made out of concrete and it's old and dirty. And so I've recreated it here in more splendor. And yeah, thinking about the garden as like a transformative space, but also about humans' strange desire to like control nature and put borders places. And forever I've been wanting to make a big weird heirloom tomato because I think they're just like, their form is like so queer and of the body. So I wanted to make this big tomato kind of like bursting out of these borders. And another process shot, this is made with paper mache and then covered with batting and fabric. And this was up recently at InLiquid in the Crane building, and shown in proximity to this banner, which I made a new wallpaper for, which I will show you in a second. So making this, like, I dream of doing like more garden beds and having all these different things come together. But this past summer, I've had the opportunity to show some newer work in conjunction with older work and explore these like different relationships that I maybe hadn't anticipated. So here it's like this work, and then this furry disco ball I made probably in 2017 maybe. And this like big curtain is back here from the same time. So trying to like also keep that voice in my head from the studio visit that said, maybe these things are more interesting together. And so those are some things I'm thinking about. And yeah, I took the same risographs and made a repeat pattern out of those that I printed as wallpaper, as an alternate background for these banners than just the painted wall. And I really enjoyed that because this way it's like at eye level, and I feel like people were able to read it a bit more, not in full, but pick up more snippets, without having to like bend over to look at the mushrooms on the ground. And yeah, right now I'm just kind of in a place of play and thinking about these different things. These are some mushrooms I saw in Tennessee, black trumpet mushrooms. They were delicious, but also so beautiful. And so I'm kind of like, I don't know, is it going to be a drawing, a sculpture, start of something else? Does it want to live with the tomato or does it want to be something different? And so that's where I'm at right now.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing, Amy. That was super informative. And yeah, it's nice to see such a variety and breadth of your work. So I have a few pre-written questions, and then we'll open up the rest of the conversation to the group, and people can feel free to add either in video or in the chat if you have any questions. While I pose these questions, if you think of anything, feel free to put them in the chat and we can address those. So you touched on this a bit in the beginning, but has your time in Houston influenced any of your current and recent work? And along with that, have you felt influenced artistically now that you're working out of Philadelphia?
Yeah, Houston was such an amazing place to grow up. It's a super diverse and vibrant city. It's a very ugly city in some ways, like, really flat, a lot of traffic. I didn't really have like a relationship to nature in Houston the way that I do now. So it was kind of a revelation for me to move to the East Coast. And it's like, and same thing in Baltimore that it is here, like in 30 minutes, you can be in the forest. Whereas 30 minutes in Houston, you're like still in Houston or like in a shopping mall. I don't know. And, maybe those spots existed and I didn't find them, but it was much more of like urban sprawl. Whereas here there's a bit more nature nearby the city, which I really enjoyed exploring. But yeah, certainly we saw some inspiration that Houston had on my work. But yeah, it's a funny thing. Like I haven't lived there as an adult. I left after high school, and I'm actually right now in a show in Houston for the first time. But it's an alumni show through my high school. That's still my main connection.
So your art has been described as playful. How do you yourself conceive the tone of your work?
I think for sure playful. Most of the time, I think maybe we saw a few like kind of sad, earnest things just now, but yeah, I think why not be playful? I like to make work that kind of puts joy into the world, that invites people to engage with it. And then hopefully maybe also challenges them at some point or asks other questions, but yeah.
Cool. And then many of your installations are larger scale. What is your intention behind the size of your works, and what do you perceive their impact to be?
My intention is to fill up my basement and a storage unit in New Jersey. Really wish I knew why I can't stop making giant things. Yeah, I think at some point it became important to take up space. In grad school, sometimes like folks would be dismissive of like the aesthetic of my work. And most of the time a plainly kind of like sexist way. And for better or for worse, it's like harder to dismiss things when they're bigger. But I think there's also a way that larger sculptures like engage with the body that you understand like your scale in relation to them, rather than something like you're looking upon as something you can be among.
I agree that the compulsion to go big, it's hard to escape it.
Oh my God, really need to unlearn it.
Yeah. So the final question that I have for you before we open it up to everybody else is, how did you come to use such a bright and colorful palette?
I mean, I've always loved bright colors, and yeah, I was thinking about this, and that, you know, there was a time when folks were like, would use the word subtle a lot in my studio. And I think it was like kind of me being scared. And at some point, maybe it was also when things got enormous, but just wanting to kind of be a bit more in your face and harder to ignore. Like my friend Eric and I would talk about the like Felix Gonzalez Torres problem, where, you know, there was a show when they talked about his partner that he was making work about as like his friend, you know, and this like wanting to kind of sanitize things for audiences. And so I wanted to make work that I guess was not like that you couldn't misinterpret or kind of deliberately misread or misdescribe. So I think maybe being like big and bold and colorful is like part of that impulse.
Awesome. Thank you for answering all those questions. And yeah, I'll open it up to anybody else. If anyone has any questions, you can feel free to put on your video, or if you're more comfortable putting them in the chat, we can do that as well.
That was amazing, Amy, by the way, to just see all of your work and see everything that you've been up to, especially in quarantine, right? Like, I feel like there's just been like this big distance between seeing what people are up to. And right now you're in your studio at Soapbox in West Philly. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about how your studio, your actual studio kind of works and how you spend time in that space, and you know, what kind of creating looks like for you in that space.
Yeah. Well, when we went into lockdown, I basically brought as much as I could home. I have a studio mate and we weren't potted. So, and then it's also like, you know, like the Soapbox, it's an amazing space. It's a community print shop similar to Second State and zine library. But then they also have like several private studios like on the perimeter of the print shop. So, you know, walking from my studio to the bathroom or even like coming into my studio, like these common areas. And so in the early days when we didn't really know like what was what, I just brought home my drafting table and as much as I could for all the art that I wasn't going to make during lockdown. And I taught from home in that space as well. At the time, Vivian and I were sharing like a back bedroom in my house as a studio space. So I was doing that until the fire at my house. And my studio had been like pretty untouched in that time. And actually, my two kind of childhood best friends came up and helped me organize my studio and clean it out and make it like a happy space again, which was like such a gift. So that was just, yeah, a few months ago. And so I've been kind of getting into the space. So there's screen printing facilities here that I make use of. There's amazing like letterpress stuff here that I don't use, but is cool. And like, they also just got a Rizzo here that maybe someday I'll use. But yeah, and so I share this space with Lindsay Dyfick, who's an amazing artist that I went to grad school with. And yeah.
So it looks like we have a question from Erin, who is a former fob holder at Second State. So Erin asks, how do you find yourself connecting to queer content / media from before you came of age? Or is your artwork a way of connecting with it?
Thank you, Erin. That's a beautiful question. I definitely once I kind of realized that there was this whole archive of radical queer content that nobody told me existed until I was 25 or whatever. I got pretty obsessed, spent a lot of time reading about things in the archive, realizing that my generation didn't invent intersectionality or all these other things. And there are so many gaps in the queer archive, but there's also so much more there than I thought, and it's preserved in this way, like it has just been preserved by people who care about it. It hasn't historically had any institutional preservation the way other archives do. And so the things that get saved are also kind of interesting, and it's a lot of ephemera and kind of very personal things. And so, yeah, I got very obsessed, and it was I feel like, we can grow up romanticizing so many histories, but queerness was not a history that I grew up romanticizing because it seemed pretty rough back in the day. And so I feel like I got to at that time, kind of build my own mythologies a little bit. And then I felt very called out by this text by Heather Love called Feeling Backward, which talks about what Heather calls the quote unquote emotional rescue of queer figures from the past, and how we want to kind of think of them through our own contemporary lens and rescue them from their historical reality, despite whether or not that's of interest to them. It's really more about our own desires. So I think about that a lot, and I think that's a really interesting phenomenon. And I think it's totally reasonable to want to feel connected to those histories. And then I also try to be kind of critical of where that desire comes from and what it means.
Thank you.
All right, and then we have another question from Vivian. Vivian asks, I'm curious about when the archive research fits in. Do you find a cool thing by browsing and then go from there, or have a specific something that you are looking for?
Great question. So there's different kinds of archives, and they're kind of navigated differently. Some places are very kind of closed, and you have to use a finding aid and have this very specific thing that you want to see, and maybe they'll let you see it. And then there's places like Interference Archive in New York, which is radically accessible, and anyone can come off the streets and just poke around. William Way, the John Wilcox Jr. Archive, is somewhat in between. And so you do have to make an appointment. And the first time I went there, I was truly terrified. And someone had just told me about it, and I wanted to check it out. But I didn't really know what they had there or what I could look at. And, they have so much that the archivist was kind of so what do you want to see? And I was just I don't know, nothing, everything. And so eventually kind of sussed out well, I'm interested in local histories or histories of protest in the city. And then he kind of pointed to me to some certain things. One time I was there looking for dance party posters, and one of the kind of sad and beautiful things about queer archives is they're often underfunded and therefore a little disorganized. So I found so many things that I wasn't looking for that were fascinating because they were all like shoved into the same drawers. But yeah, definitely like, you know, one thing is a jumping off point, and then you open up the box to look for that one thing and you see all these other things. And then suddenly you've been there for 6 hours and the archivist needs to go home, is kind of how it's been for me. And yeah, at William Way, like they let you take pictures and scans. Other places maybe let you take pictures, but not scans. It's like really different from place to place. And thanks, Jen, for providing all these helpful links.
I had another question. I was curious about how printmaking and the idea of the multiple and repetition reinforce a lot of the concepts that you're working with, and how you see printmaking like really kind of bolstering the work. You know, you had like a painting that you then turn into a repeat pattern. It's like, what is the drive to then create something that can be repeated and disseminated?
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely, yeah, I'm trained as a printmaker, very printmaker brain. And I think, yeah, the repetition was something that initially drew me to printmaking. And definitely in college, I was like obsessed with the story of the yellow wallpaper and like thinking about repetition as something that can be comforting, but also kind of maddening. And then where I'm at now, I'm thinking much more about like printed ephemera and dissemination, like you're saying. And, you know, when I look through these archives, there's like, just like wild, charming, handmade, like printed ephemera, all kinds of things. And so, and I think like, even when my work doesn't take the form of prints, that's like often the inspiration.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And does anybody have any other questions? All right, then. Well, I guess we'll wrap up here. I want to thank you a lot, Amy. That was amazing. It's a very in-depth and beautiful presentation. And thank you to everyone who came here. Thanks to Jen and Second State for hosting. And even though Joanne is
Lucy
not
has
there.
a question. Lucy has a question.
All right, Lucy.
Oh, I think you're still on mute.
Sorry, it's taking me a long time to type. I am also curious about how that like relationship with like ephemera and the multiple, like how you work with that, and also like textiles, and how you like sort of work between those two.
Yeah, let me think about that. I, yeah, clearly love working with textiles. And I also, I mean, I love working with like paper mache and kind of like low craft things. And I think a lot about like kind of DIY histories and relationships with like craft and printmaking, with histories of protest and histories of like queerness, and like the troupe, the Coquettes, who would just like make these incredible costumes from like thrift store junk. And yeah, and so maybe that's a little bit of how those things come together. And I don't know, I mean, could you even flesh out that question a bit more? Like, or maybe I just don't have a great answer, but.
No, I think that was a great answer. Thank you.
And I guess that too, like, there's something in like when I'm envisioning something and wanting to make it and realize that it has to be fabric, it's often like a texture thing. Like I love working with like all different textures and putting them together. And of course, then like printing on fabric is not so much a texture thing, but like a surface thing. And yeah, I think I'm also often trying to get fabric to behave as like a skin, and like a way to kind of wrap things in imagery. And fabric doesn't always want to be a skin, is what I'm learning. But yeah.
All right. Do we have any other questions? All right, then. Well, then I'll give my second wrap up. Thanks again so much, Amy. Oh, wait, no. That's Jen. Yeah, thank you again so much. This was amazing. And thank you for such a good inaugural kickoff to our virtual studio visit series. It was lovely to have you. And yeah, thank you again to everyone who came. And we will be hosting another one, as Jen said in the beginning, in December. I'll let you plug that, Jen, so you have the details.
Yes, so as soon as we get the date, we'll send out an email. I'm sure it'll be all over social media. Yes, it will be posted on YouTube, so you'll be able to catch up. And again, I'm going to give that shameless plug. It's in the link to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Help us get to 100 so that we can have, instead of youtube.com/ all those crazy letters, it can say youtube.com/ Second State Press. Thank you so much, Amy. This was really super awesome, and we're so happy to have you.
Thanks so much, everybody, for being here and for all your questions and everything. Look forward to seeing the next ones.
Sounds good. All right. Good night, everyone.
Thank you. Good night, everyone.